Welcome to the Lillian Smith Awards, and welcome to the library venue. My name is Laura Moore, and I am co-captain of this venue today. And I'm going to turn you over to Charles Johnson, who will do the introduction of the awards. Mr. Johnson is president of the Southern Regional Council and vice president of Tuskegee University. Mr. Johnson.
Good afternoon. I bring you greetings on behalf of the Southern Regional Council, which this year marks 100 years, a 100-year tradition of promoting racial justice, protecting democratic rights, and broadening civic participation throughout the Southern United States. I'm joined this year by our Vice President, Professor Leland Ware, who was the author of the recent book, A Century of Segregation, Race, Class, and Disadvantage. Professor Ware, are you here? Somewhere there he is back there. So in the years after the Second World War, when others were charging a cautious course on racial change and calling for more humane treatment within a segregated system, Lillian Smith, nearly alone among her colleagues, boldly and persistently articulated an entirely different vision of the completely desegregated South. And as much as anything else, it was her persistent urging that persuaded the Southern Regional Council to follow her lead. And if you want to know more about Lillian Smith, I invite you to catch a viewing whenever you can of the new documentary, Breaking the Silence, Lillian Smith, the producer of which is here with us today, Hal Jacobs. Hal, will you stand and recognize? Now, following her death in 1966, the Southern Regional Council established an annual award in her name to recognize authors whose work carries on the tradition of Lillian Smith, work of outstanding moral vision and literary merit, which honestly portrays the South, its people, its problems, and its promise. And for the last several years, this award has been presented as a partnership between the Southern Regional Council, which originated the award, the University of Georgia Libraries, which house the Lillian Smith papers and which basically provide the infrastructure for this award exercise. And there's a big staff from UGA here today, led by Caitlin Dodson. Is Kate here? She's outside, apparently, if not. But we appreciate all that they do. And the Georgia Center of the Book, which presents the Decatur Book Festival, and for the 5th year, Piedmont College, which operates the Lillian Smith Center in Clayton, Georgia. Now, there are many people who've had a hand in bringing this event to you this year and every year, but I want to give special attention to our heroic and distinguished panel of jurors, many of whom are here today. Yes. Yes. They So not with us today is Minion C.K. Morrison from the University of Delaware, but also here from the Board of Regents of the University System of Georgia is Merrill Penson, formerly of the Atlanta Public Library System. We have James Taylor. From from the Morehouse College, we have Dolores Stevens. Where's Dolores? And then our chair from Clark Atlanta University is Mary Twining Baird, who's right here. So we want to welcome you and thank you for coming. As we've indicated, immediately following the ceremony, there will be copies of the books for purchase outside this room, and then they will be available to be signed in the vestibule across the hall. We want to welcome you again and thank you for coming.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Matthew Touch, and I am the director of the Lillian Smith Center at Piedmont College. If you'd like more information, just talk to me. But I am here to actually introduce Virginia Eubanks and her book, Automating Inequality: How High-Tech Tools Profile, Police, and Punish the Poor. She is unable to be with us today, so I'm going to be reading some prepared remarks that she sent in. But before I do that, I just wanted to give you a little bit about the book, dealing with automated systems, EBT cards, housing in Los Angeles, child services in Pennsylvania. She looks at three distinct areas, EBT cards, I think, in Indiana, and how they are used to actually control and survey, basically, the poor in this case, but how those actually move into start controlling and surveying everyone. So the ways that they're used as surveillance and, that's basically it, government surveillance. There are two stories that I kind of wanted to give you real quick. She starts her book with a story of her partner who was actually beaten by a group of people in, I think, in upstate New York. His jaw was broken and a bunch of other stuff. He had to go to the hospital. They went through a bunch of different tests, the emergency room, insurance paid for it, all that. A few weeks later, she went to go get a prescription, and she went to get the prescription, and they wouldn't give it to her, basically saying the insurance wouldn't pay for it. So she called the insurance company to figure out what happened, and she called them, and they basically said maybe it was just a little slip of the finger that, no big deal, we'll fix it. But nothing was fixed. And basically what she kind of, doing all this research she's done before, she kind of realized that what had happened was she had been flagged because her insurance started probably a week or two or a few days before that incident. So they thought she was defrauding the system, essentially. So all these triggers, she basically flipped. And that's kind of what got her started on this project. Like I said, she looks at three different specific regions, homeless, community, and placing them with housing in Los Angeles, child welfare services, and abuse or projectors of abuse in Philadelphia, and then, of course, or in Pennsylvania, I think Pittsburgh actually, and then EBT cards and that system in Indiana. I wanted to read you a couple of paragraphs before I got to her comments, though. So she's talking about interviewing somebody, and I'll just read you the paragraphs. Cheerleaders of the new data regime rarely acknowledge the impacts of digital decision-making on poor and working-class people. This myopia is not shared by those lower on the economic hierarchy, who often see themselves as targets rather than beneficiaries of these systems. For example, one day in early 2000, I sat talking to a young mother on welfare about her experiences with technology. When our conversation turned to EBT cards, Dorothy Allen said, quote, "They're great, except social services uses them as a tracking device." I must have looked shocked because she explained that her caseworker routinely looked at her purchase records. Just to let you know, I've known this in colleges as well with student athletes at a specific school I will not name right now. If you want to know later, talk to me. But instead of having students at the door to check attendance, they went to basically GPS tracking on their phone to check attendance. I'm sure this is not the only school, but poor women are the test subjects for surveillance technology, Dorothy told me. Then she added, quote, "You should pay attention to what happens to us, you're next." This is 2000. Dorothy's insight was prescient. The kind of invasive electronic scrutiny she described has become commonplace across the class spectrum today. Think about, my phone's over here, but think about that. Digital tracking and decision-making systems have become routine in policing, political forecasting, marketing, credit reporting, criminal sentencing, business management, finance, the administration of public programs. As these systems developed in sophistication and reach, I started to hear them described as forces for control, manipulation, and punishment. Stories of new technologies facilitating communication and opening opportunity became harder to find. Today, I mostly hear that the new regime of data constricts poor and working class people's opportunities, demobilizes their political organizing, limits their movement, and undercuts their human rights. What has happened since 2007 to alter so many people's hopes and dreams? How has the digital revolution become a nightmare for so many? So that's from her introduction. And then she talks about the history of poorhouses, so leading up to this, starting to think about 1800s. But I'm going to read her comments to you, or her speech to you. I am so grateful to the Lillian Smith Book Awards Committee, chose this year to recognize Automating Inequality, along with the extraordinary books A Girl Stands at the Door and The Lost Education of Horace Tate. It is especially meaningful because as a Southerner, transplanted at an early age to the Northeast, whose accent only reemerges when I drink too much whiskey, it honors my work within the long tradition of voices of conscience writing from and about the American South. To have your name entered into a register with such luminous minds, and these are all winners of the Lillian Smith Book Award: Alex Haley, John Gaventa, Alice Walker, Gloria Naylor, Marion Wright Edelman, Barbara Ransby, Daniel McGuire, I would add John Lewis, Ernest Gaines, the list goes on and on and on. You can find it on Wikipedia or on the Book Awards website. It is to be at once deeply touched by the privilege and profoundly terrified by challenge of living up to their example. The work of these authors inspires us to consider, how do we tell the truths of this world on fire with frankness, grace, and power? How do we describe, as Lillian Smith herself added in Killers of the Dream, quote, trouble so big that people turn away from its size, their imaginations close tight against the hurt of others? And how do we do it all while grounding our readers in the radical possibility of hope, reconciliation, and healing? In Automating Inequality, I describe new digital tools emerging in social services across the United States. Automated eligibility systems, matching algorithms and statistical models that rationalize caregiving in an era of enforced austerity. These systems take scarcity for granted, shackling our imagination to the twisted, constraining shape of current politics. They perform digital triage, facilitating the inhuman choice of who among us deserves the basic necessities for human life: food, shelter, family integrity, and who will we allow to starve, go homeless, or lose their child to the state. Simply, they tell us that we should accept the world as it is and adjust our expectations. They try to tell us that things aren't ever going to get better, but that is an insidious lie. At their worst, these systems act as apathy overrides. At their worst, these systems act as empathy overrides, allowing us to turn away from the most pressing problem of our age, the life and soul-threatening legacy of institutional racism, classism, and sexism in America. They allow us to ignore our moral responsibility by replacing the messiness of human relationships with the predictable charms of systems engineering. But these digital systems are actually narrative tools in denial, machines for making sense of the world and for making political decisions. Data sets, predictive models, artificial intelligence, though they present themselves as objective and neutral representations of truth, they are simply stories pretending they're not stories. That's what makes them so dangerous. They deny that they have a narrative point of view, that they are shaped by their context and history. They deny that they embody normative assumptions about the world, about who we should and can be. It is easier, Smith wrote, to arouse hatred of others than love for one's own freedom and future. Let me read that one more time. It is easier, Smith wrote, to arouse hatred of others than love for one's own freedom and future. Now is not the time for two simple stories. The longing for freedom and justice, the will to collectively build a better future, requires clear vision and courageous truth-telling. Books can be bridges to span brokenness, elixirs to revive dead dreams, to join us one to another, tiny hands that open the closed places in our minds and hearts where we've turned away from recognizing injustice for fear of the change the realization will require. It is my honor and privilege to aspire to truly belong on this historic list. And it is with deep gratitude that I thank you all. Dr. Virginia Eubanks.
Good afternoon. This is called The Girls. In spite of all the insults, rejections, and hostile assaulting behavior, they persisted. The schools were often incredibly run-down institutions, unsafe and unsanitary, but the young people were expected to attend them and be grateful for what they had. In some more enlightened southern communities, lovely modern school buildings were built, still firmly separate but equal. What these young women rightly felt was that they should be entitled to what everyone else had and determined to fight for it. Dr. Rachel Devlin is an associate professor of history at Rutgers University since 2011. She earned her PhD at Yale University in 1998. Her scholarly interests include cultural politics of girlhood, sexuality, and race in post-war United States. Her publications include Relative Intimacy and a number of articles tackling a subject one did not name, even though we had such intimacy forced upon us. In present times, we are still grappling with, to quote Dr. Devlin, sexual authority within and outside of the Me Too movement, and everyone is talking out loud about it. This book, A Girl Stands at the Door, depicts the strong feminine presence in initiating the lawsuits before others thought them capable of it. The young women and girls were active in marching, going to jail, fearlessly facing down the men who would do them injury. They sang at spirit meetings beforehand, sang as they marched, and they and the young men in the movement from their separate jail cells, all crowded in to each other to keep their spirits up. They were enormously courageous. Lillian Smith comments on it in her chapter, The Crisis in the South, contrasting how older people haver around with decisions with the direct actions of the young people. If only she could have seen the Parkland students who showed such direct engagement with the powers that be, their response to that tragedy. These young women persisted in defiance of their own humiliations. The African American beauty shop owners were supportive of them, as many of them were independent owners and did not have bosses, male or otherwise. They cleaned them up when the over-enthusiastic hooligans dumped food, mud, and anything else they could find to diminish their dignity. According to Tiffany Jill, they restored them and their morale with sympathy and love, which they could wield in aid of their sisters. A book we honor today has a story to tell that has languished unrecognized for too long. So many women's stories have not been told, but now they are coming out to the kudos they richly deserve. These young women saw a step they could take to help themselves and others, and they bravely stepped up and into history. I knew Millicent Brown and her family in Charleston, South Carolina, but I had not known the depth of what she had gone through to the degree that Dr. Devlin writes about. Dr. Josephine Bradley was my boss in the African and African American Studies program at Clark Atlanta University, and I never had a better one. Josephine Boyd, as she was known in the 50s, integrated her high school in the Greensboro Senior High School on her own among a student body of 2,000 and took plenty of flack for her people, and she stood 4 feet 10 inches high. Many years later, our university administration tried to give her some static, but they did not know who they were dealing with. I was working with Mr. Esau Jenkins in the Charleston area with some young people who had more or less hit a wall in a situation similar to Josephine Boyd Bradley's. They told us what had been going on. Some of them were nervous wrecks from the difficulties that they'd been going through. Dr. Devlin calls out the lack of support from NAACP, but there was Mrs. Daisy Bates, who had been affiliated with the NAACP, as I understand it. She met with the young people in her area in solidarity and support in the afternoons after school to help them get through the experiences they endured. We are so happy to award a Lillian Smith Prize to Dr. Rachel Devlin for the excellent work she has done in telling the world about these brave young women, some of whom I had the privilege to know and work with. Dr. Devlin could use this as a weapon in case she got into trouble. This is very heavy. Dr. Johnson, is somebody going to take a picture of us? Okay, thank you. Let's come out this way. So.
Maybe we should have it.
And let your name, I think, would be good. Yes, why don't you hold it?
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, thanks so much. Yeah, back it goes.
I'm 5 feet tall. So. Thank you so much. It's so wonderful to be back at the Decatur Book Festival, where I spoke to one of my first audiences on my book tour. It turned out to be one of my best audiences. And with me was my daughter, Katie, who kept me from misspelling readers' names on more than one occasion and kept these books from the trash heap. And I appreciate her presence here so much today. And I just want to mention one other person, Dr. Roseanne Adderley, who took a bus from New Orleans to be here, and I could not have written this book without her friendship. Thank you. Thank you to the Southern Regional Council, the University of Georgia Libraries, the DeKalb County Public Library, the Georgia Center for the Book, and Piedmont College. It's a great consortium of people. I appreciate so much the time and work it takes to be on a jury. And I just want to thank Dr. Twining Baird, Merrill Penson, James Taylor, Dr. Morrison, and Dr. Stevens. I also am so honored to share this award with Dr. Eubanks and Dr. Walker, whose book, The Miseducation of Horace Tate, is a fascinating and eye-opening book, as is Automating Inequality. This is a very special award for me because Lillian Smith is a personal hero. I grew up in Texas, and Lillian Smith talks so much about the silence that surrounded segregation and the wound that creates for white young people as much as it does for black young people. And that book spoke to me a great deal when I was a young person, feeling very alone at my all-white high school in the mid-1980s. So it is with great gratitude that I accept this award. Killers of the Dream is a book written in the form of a letter to a child and about Lillian Smith's own childhood growing up. And it's about real questions that she got from campers at her camp. And the book is a meditation on segregation and what it does to the human soul. And Lillian Smith took her campers' questions seriously. And she saw that in the simplicity of their young questions, that those questions reached at the heart of the hypocrisies of the South. I believe that the most important reasons Lillian Smith was and remained a true radical, not a Southern liberal, but a Southern radical, was because she continued throughout her life to listen to young people, like Ella Baker, like Eleanor Roosevelt, like Polly Murray, like Mary McLeod Bethune. She never stopped learning from young people. And I think we could all do well to keep doing that. She rejoiced in their passion, she rejoiced in their urgency, and she rejoiced in their insight into the contradictions of American mores. I believe that historians need to follow her example and listen to young people more. When young people act like the girls in A Girl Stands at the Door, it is a measure of the level of crisis that we adults have not resolved. It is a measure of our failures as a society. And so it was with the young girls who took on school desegregation. A Girl Stands at the Door retells the story of Brown versus Board of Education as a story about the girls who led the grassroots movement that created that decision. Girls who filed lawsuits in the late 1940s, over a dozen from rural Texas all the way to Washington, D.C., and then who, after Brown, volunteered in vastly disproportionate numbers to desegregate the schools. Those who took enormous risks to file these lawsuits and who suffered backlash from the communities in which they lived. These plaintiffs, they had to walk up to a white school. They had to meet with the white principal. The principal inevitably got wind that they were coming, and he would come out and meet them on the steps. They never even made it through the front door. The principal would say to the young girl, usually 14 years old, "You don't want to come here." And the girls would stand up straight, and they would speak directly to the principal and say, "I do want to come to this school," usually with a smile, but with complete firmness. Girls did this all over and over again throughout the South in the late 1940s. Then they filed lawsuits. They met with reporters. They met with lawyers. I don't know if you've met with lawyers before. But they did this as 12-year-olds. These meetings can be long, and they stuck with it. And they also testified on the stand. They did incredible work. The most important work they did, though, was speak to the press with confidence about what they were doing. And Millicent Brown, who Dr. Baird mentioned, I'll just say one word about her. Girls desegregated schools and were plaintiffs for two reasons. The first is that they were committed to the ideal of school desegregation. The second reason is that they were good at it. They were polite, they were diplomatic, they were poised, and they were steadfast and determined. And this is what allowed them to be such pioneers. Millicent Brown, her mother had been trying to transfer her to a local all-white school, historically white school, 3 blocks from her house, since the Brown decision. Summer of 1963, her father simply says to her, "Put on your Sunday clothes, we're going to school board." So they get to the school board. Millicent Brown has no idea what's going on. The secretary comes out. She simply says, "They're ready to see you now." She walks in, and the all-male, all-white Charleston School Board is sitting around a table, about 12 men. They said, "We have some questions for you. Do you like your black school? Do you like your teachers? Do you like your extracurriculars? Do you like your friends?" "Yes, yes, yes, yes." "So why would you want to leave all that and go where you don't know anybody?" And Millicent Brown, unprepared as she was, shot back, "Because I make friends wherever I go." And she had checkmated the whole room, and it was the simplicity and the humanity of her response. As if to say, I don't know what you do when you go to a new place, but I make friends. And it was exactly this kind of simplicity and humanity that Lillian Smith saw in young people. Lillian Smith, I believe, would not have been surprised that all these young women led the desegregation charge. She would have been frustrated, I think, that it took so long to recognize these young women, but she would not have been surprised. After Brown, 6 girls and 3 boys desegregated in Little Rock, 18 girls and 5 boys in Baton Rouge, 4 girls in 1960 in New Orleans, and in Albany, Georgia, and I don't have to tell this crowd that Albany is in Georgia. 6 girls desegregated Albany High in 1964. And Mamie Ford Jones said to me, "You know, that year we went over, they thought they were getting the 6 smartest girls." No. They got the 6 girls who would go. And they were very insistent on their own agency. She said, "People thought we were handpicked to desegregate Albany High. We raised our hands and said, yes, we will go." There was a great deal of violence. It was relentless. It was daily. It was psychological and physical. It was the teachers. They all survived. They all graduated. And every woman I spoke to said she would have done it over again. So we owe a huge debt of gratitude to these women. And I would just like to say that going forward, I think in memory of Lillian Smith, we should continue to look at young people and as historians not forget what they are doing. As we look at Greta Thunberg, as we look at Emma Gonzalez and David Hogg with gun control, as we look at Opal Tometi, Patrisse Cullors, and Alicia Garza, who started Black Lives Matter when they were in their 20s. I hope that these young, living, breathing young people will allow us to look back and see the leadership of young people. By awarding a Girls Dance at the Door, this committee is, I believe, sending that message, and for this I am particularly grateful. Thank you.
The Lost Education of Horace Tate. Before 1954, just south of where we are, Fayette County, Georgia, did not offer secondary education to its black citizens. My grandmother taught in a one-room school until a school was built. This is in Peachtree City. My father, a son of Fayette County, was in the first graduating class of the Henry Hunt High School at Fort Valley. My grandmother, who also went to Fort Valley when people had to go back to school under those normal school days, along with aunts and cousins who taught at the Fayette County Training School for Blacks, which was established in 1955 until integration in 1968. My grandmother was a teacher of the year for that training school. Later, her daughter, for whom I am named, was now teacher of the year for the now integrated Fayette County schools in 1976. I also, at some point, had the privilege of meeting Dr. Tate when he was a senator, and I talked to him about public libraries and how important public libraries were. I didn't know anything about his education background. I just wanted him to support libraries. He died in 2002. And I share these personal connections because what Dr. Vanessa Siddle Walker has done in The Lost Education of Horace Tate is to show through the notes and efforts of Dr. Horace Tate, an amazing 1943 Fort Valley graduate, and the executive leader of the Georgia Black Teachers Association, how with Dr. Tate's leadership, ordinary black teachers fought in very secretive, hidden, and under-the-radar ways and over many generations for racial justice for students across this state. Dr. Tate hid these notes to protect teachers because if you said too much, you could get in trouble and would get fired. But he hid these notes. And what the notes revealed was that teachers, while they were getting paid less, that really wasn't what they were talking about. They wanted adequate classrooms. They wanted curriculum materials. They wanted access to what they knew was good education. Her research in Dr. Tate's hidden archives, file cabinets and attics, records retrieved from his home that his wife wished that he would have discarded, is remarkable. And while I can no longer ask my grandmother and aunts about these things, this book helps me appreciate what their professional lives were about and helps all of us understand that the fight for educational justice is fought mostly by unsung heroes day by day and over generations and generations. And what I hope this book will do will inspire others to continue. Dr. Walker is the Samuel Candler Dobbs Professor of African American Educational Studies at Emory University. She has a BA from North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and a master's and doctorate of education from Harvard University. For 30 years now, she has explored this segregated schooling of African American children and the hidden systems of advocacy that demanded equality and justice for these children. Her research has garnered a number of awards, including the Grawemeyer Award for Education and the American Educational Research Award, even in her early careers. She is currently the president of the American Educational Research Association. It is my privilege to present the Lillian Smith Book Award to Dr. Vanessa Siddle Walker for her work, The Lost Education of Horace Tate, which I hope all of you will purchase.
Good afternoon. Thank you to all of you. I'm not 5 feet, so I'm so high. Good afternoon, and thank you to all of you for taking the time to come this afternoon. I'd like to pose a question for you because it's the question with which I had to contend now 18, 19 years ago. What do you do when someone who's dying asks you if you've been back to the building where you first met? Have you been back to the building? Dr. Tate would say frequently in the last weeks of his life. I couldn't figure out why I would possibly need to go back to the building. I'd met Dr. Tate at that building 2 years previous. I had been with him for 2 and 3 days a week over the last year at his home in the basement. I'd seen everything at the building, I thought, and I was going through files in his basement. Why would I go back to the building? And yet he was persistent. Have you been back to the building? It wasn't actually a question as much as it was a direction. I want you to go back to the building. I regret to say that each time my response to him was, no, Dr. Tate, I haven't been back, but I'm going. And then he died on Thanksgiving evening. I saw him earlier that day. I didn't go back to the building until after the funeral when black teachers converged in a church with senatorial leaders in Georgia and the governor. A strange conglomeration of people that represented a career for him. I spoke, and then I went back to the building. I couldn't figure out what I was looking for at the building because, of course, he didn't tell me why I was going or what was there. He simply said, have you been back to the building? I asked his daughter, Harrisina, we can tell he wanted a boy. I asked his daughter, Harrisina, what is it that your father wanted me to see? I mean, it's been 2 years. We've been talking. He's been describing things I don't really understand because in my understanding about segregated schools, I've come to learn, I mean, I knew already that there was a resilience within the communities and that people were fighting against segregation in these school communities. I understood that. But when Dr. Tate talked, he talked about dark roads and principals and plaintiffs and girls and Thurgood Marshall, and I didn't know what he was talking about. Sometimes he would say things like, you know, as he got sicker, he'd say, you'll know how to put it together. And I would look at him, I didn't want to tell him, no, I don't know what you're talking about. I will not know how to put this together. It doesn't fit any historical box I know to put it in. What are principals doing talking to Thurgood Marshall or parents? Nothing about what you're saying makes sense. And dark roads, you know, dropping somebody off by the river and picking somebody else up in a funeral car. What are you talking about? I didn't know, but I kept listening because he clearly thought he was talking about something, and I wanted to know. So if we'd had these conversations and we'd had them periodically for now 2 years, and I'd been at the basement of his home for 2 years, why do I need to go back to the building? This Georgia Teachers and Education Association building, this building where he had been the executive director of these teachers who would meet in droves, literally thousands for annual meetings in Atlanta. This building he seemed to care so much about that he had actually purchased it after desegregation. I knew that, but I didn't know why he would have purchased this building. I knew I'd met him there, that it still looked like it looked in 1970, but why do I need to go back when I've been through everything there? Harrisina said, Daddy meant the attic. The attic? There are 3 floors, but what do you mean, an attic? And she explained very perfunctorily, you know where Dad's office is, right? I said, yes. You know the door behind the door in his office? I said, no. She said, well, there's a door behind the door in his office. Go through that door. And when you go through, you'll be in a little hall. And look for a door on your right. And when you go through that door, go down some stairs. But be careful because the lights are out and you can't see. And at the bottom of the stairs, there's a hole in the floor. So make sure you don't fall in the hole in the floor at the bottom of the stairs. And when you get at the bottom, just kind of weave around and you will be in a room, a big room. And then you'll see some stairs going upstairs. And take those stairs upstairs, and when you get to the top of that landing, look very carefully and you'll see the door to an attic. And go through that door, and that's the attic. Well, this is 2002. If you will let your mind go back to 2002, you will remember that cell phones did not have flashlights on them. Right? And they didn't work very well. Of course, mine still doesn't, but that's just me. I'm not trying to throw AT&T under the bus, but... So I'm with a cell phone that does not have a flashlight, and I'm by myself, going through the familiar that I had explored with Dr. Tate into a completely new world. I don't know about you, but I actually don't like bugs or snakes or things that crawl. Clearly, I am moving from one building into another building that is attached. I now know that it's the building that the teachers first purchased from a physician in 1951. But I did not know it at the time. I did not know that the new building where I had been meeting him was literally attached to the old building. I'd heard Dr. Tate say sometimes I would need to escape the press. Why does an educator need to escape the press? But I never thought to ask him how he got out. This apparently was the escape route that he used. When I meandered through this circuitous space, these circuitous spaces, and made my way to the steps leading to the attic, these steps are literally this wide, and that's not an exaggeration. And they are very steep. I remember standing there and thinking, do they hold weight? I'm by myself with a cell phone that doesn't work. Am I going to fall? You know, I mean, I don't even know what's going to happen. But I'm the daughter of an old black preacher, and they used to say, I believe I'll run on and see what the end is going to be. And so I thought, well, I've come this far, so I may as well, you know, if I fall in, I fall in. Let's go see. And in the attic were all the files of the Georgia Teachers and Education Association. A full collection, carefully appended one to another, as though in the beginning they were being very careful, and then around on 2 floors things just dumped. Magazines and books and the legal cases, right, with the parents' signatures in their original handwriting. I felt a little like Fred Sanford. Remember Fred Sanford used to say, honey, this is the big one. Remember that? I felt a little like that because I knew that here was the real story. The one that he started giving me a little bit, and then a little bit more, and then a little bit more, and then finally let me come to his house. And when I saw 3 file cabinets in his basement, I'm ecstatic. But there was a room across from that, and even the last time he was in the basement with me before he died, he said, I said, you know, it took you a long time to show me this stuff. And he said, come here. And he led me through the basement. He said, I have stuff hidden here, and here, and here, and here. The story needs a storyteller. And while I thought I was learning those 2 years what the story actually was, in real time, he was vetting me to decide whether or not I would be the storyteller. There are many researchers who've come before me. I've now read transcripts of what they sent back to him. But they never saw the fullness of the story. For whatever reason, I got the fullness. Now, why does it matter? It matters that Dr. Tate hid these materials because Black education materials were mostly destroyed with desegregation. Come over here quickly, someone told Miss Inez when I was writing my first book in this area. They're burning everything. And she managed to grab a few photographs and things that I have in their highest potential. I thought it was just the school level, but it's not just the school level, it's the organizational level where the records were also destroyed. I went into my own office, Mr. Palmer, Dr. Tate's comparable in North Carolina, told me when I interviewed him, the day after desegregation, and my own files had been destroyed. If you take away a people's documents, you can write about them however you want. At some point, Dr. Tate hid the collection. And he decided to allow me to be the storyteller. It's an extraordinary collection because it rewrites our understanding of how we got here. I thought courageous parents, plaintiffs, smart attorneys, right, came together, we get Brown, it's great. What I did not understand is that the vision, the acquisition of the plaintiffs, the money, the connections with the lawyers all happen through educational organizations where we take a community and a legal team, connect them, and step back. Dr. Tate's lost education helped me understand history differently, but Dr. Tate's lost education also helps me understand the present differently, because I understand now that there are 100 years of struggle. We can document it through these files from Reconstruction right up to 1970. I understand now that yes, access was critical. That's what these teachers wanted when they sacrificed to make sure we could have Brown v. Board of Education. But I also understand that the desegregation compromise that happened in 1968, that was implemented in 1970, forced them to exchange their strong advocacy organizations, the aspiration that they created in these schools, for limited access. And I think if we are going to move forward, we have to figure out how to continue their road to access, but we must also, I think, have the courage to follow the directions of a dead man, step into a room, a place we never expected to go, and recognize that the formula for success for Black children will rest on this tripod of access, advocacy, and aspiration. And we must never elevate one over the other, for the children need all three. Let me say this as I leave. Ms. Lillian Smith, whose book, Killers of the Dream, I've used in my classes, I discovered shared the stage with Dr. Tate at one of their teacher education meetings. It seems to me particularly fitting and appropriate that as he introduced and acknowledged her among Black teachers, that today I would have the real distinct privilege and honor of being able to accept on his and their behalf that she now honors his legacy, even as he honored hers. I thank you so very much for the opportunity to be here and for listening. Thank you.
So let's have one more round of applause for all of our. Once again, I want to let you know that copies of all of these books are available for purchase in the vestibule right outside this room, right as we adjourn, and autographed copies are available in the room across the hall. We want to thank you for coming and see you next year.